Hey, I'm Aubriana, and this is a conversation series with builders, leaders, and people shaping and studying the work of change across media, technology, and AI. We talk about what's really happening beyond the headlines, what's real, what's messy, and how people are thinking about transformation that actually makes a difference. Welcome to Agents of Change, Human in the Loop. Hey everyone, welcome back to Agents of Change, Human in the Loop. Today I'm joined by Patrick Shea, co-founder of AdDaptive Intelligence, which is a company that's been operating at the intersection of data, programmatic, and performance marketing for over 15 years. Patrick has built AdDaptive through multiple waves of change in this industry, so I'm excited to have him on the show. That's been from early programmatic days to identity shifts and now AI. So consistently evolving the business while staying really grounded in performance. So I think something that stands out is that he's not just reacting to where the market's going. He's really had to make real decisions in real time about what to bet on, what to ignore, and how to keep a company relevant through constant change. So Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't you just give us a quick intro of who you are and AdDaptive Intelligence, if you don't mind?
Fantastic. Absolutely. So Patrick Shea, one of the co-founders of AdDaptive. Kevin O'Malley is my other co-founder. And we started the business back in 2010, really with a goal to help marketers and publishers and data owners make better results with media. And so use data to drive better media outcomes and use kind of the intelligence from those media outcomes to drive better data and to create kind of this virtuous circle right there. And we started really dealing with publishers and a lot of website owners, people who had niche data, great relationships with advertisers. And from there, started to build out our own data product and start working with brands and agencies directly. And really the last 5 years has been focused on ingesting as many signals as we can, as many different data sources as we can, both offline, online, first party, third party, behavioral signals, and trying to make a lot of sense of it. And we've seen sort of, as you mentioned, a few of these different evolutions. From our perspective, there have been kind of three main evolutions or eras of AI that I would say. And the first one was the algorithm phase. 2010, everybody had their algorithm, and my algorithm was better than your algorithm. And then over the next 5-7 years, that sort of shifted to machine learning, which was smarter algorithms. And then now it's AI. And the language models have really changed a lot of things. But I think you still get a lot of the buzz and hype, and there was a lot of parallel feelings around some of the way a lot of these different evolutions have been talked about, and each one has been super valuable in its own way and created new opportunities and new challenges for marketers, for brands, for business owners. And so it's exciting to see kind of where the space is now, moving faster than ever.
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask, what did you have to maybe unlearn to stay relevant through all of those waves that you just talked about?
That's a great question, and I appreciate that. Sunscreen is definitely the one thing. I burn so easily. For us, we're a little bit of a different company. We're a bootstrap company. Kevin and I started this, and in 2010, we were going out trying to work with publishers. Our initial platform was really a retargeting platform with a data management platform built onto it. And we looked at some opportunities around funding and decided it really wasn't the path for us. And so that changed a lot of the different decisions that we've made. And I would say the one consistent thing that we've known we can focus on and fall back on is just providing value to real clients. We've worked with fantastic clients on the publisher side, the agency side, and some of the biggest brands in the world. And we know that we're able to survive by trying to see these changes coming and make multiple bets and make some of the hedges of those bets and try and kind of look forward into the future while having a sort of cautious risk-taking approach, I guess you could say. You can't keep doing what you're doing, and you can't do 50 things either. But I think a lot of the way the market is funded and developed is, let's take 10 different companies that do one exact thing and see which one's right. And our approach more been, maybe let's try and do 3 or 4 things. And as we're having success, let's do more and more. And I know that sounds really elementary if you're thinking about just what a business is, but I think the focus on scale and the focus on growth, because to your point, you either need to become really relevant or you die. And it can be very, there's reasons why these companies are funded and investors have expectations and things like that. So I think there was definitely some great timing early on. We built some really wonderful partnerships, and we were able to create some ways of really creating enduring value. Our focus has always been, when we're working with customers, how are we adding value for them? How are we making sure that we're showing up on the right side of their ledger? So even if we're maybe an expensive partnership on paper, they then look back and see all the value that's being generated on the other side, and it continues to make sense and grow from there. So that's been our focus, but it's definitely a challenge.
I think that everybody wants to take on so much right now with this focus and push towards like scaling with AI, do you see companies making maybe that same mistake today that you talked about, like having to really narrow down on where do you want to place your bets and take risks?
I do think so. And I don't necessarily know that it's a mistake. I think that you kind of have to have a little bit of both, right? You do have to place big bets. And as somebody who spent a lot of time in my college days playing online poker, if every bet you make succeeds, you're not betting enough. Like if everything you do is right, if every test pilot you come out with works, you're not doing enough. You should be trying so much that some of it fails. And I think that's kind of the way that you increase your maximum overall sort of efficiency and capabilities through this thing. So you do have to try and fail. You have to understand what your capabilities are. And I think the biggest thing is do experiments where you understand what success looks like, how much you're going to probably have to expend to get there, and then knowing when to stop, to move on, to ship it, to say this is providing a good amount of value. Oh no, now I'm on the cliff of diminishing returns, and kind of know when to stop there, but also know when to start, and I think that being able to try a lot of different things builds experience, it builds capabilities within your team. And even if a lot of those individual pilots or tests or experiments end up, kind of floundering, the skills and the capability and the confidence that it engenders last. And that can really help you build the next thing.
Yeah. Well, I love that your poker skills are being applied still to this day. That's awesome. And I want to kind of hone in. Do you feel like there's something fundamentally different that's happening with this AI wave, maybe in terms of what feels like the same story with new language and what feels kind of net new here?
I think that you nailed it with the language. The way that we're talking about this sounds a lot like the way that things have been talked about before. But that's because marketing tends to use a lot of maximalist language. Everything is the newest, the best, the greatest. So when something comes along that actually is maybe close to the newest and the best and the greatest, you don't really have new words to describe it. So it sounds like the same breakthrough technologies we've heard about for the last 15 years, but it is really different. And I think that the intuition, the intuitiveness, the kind of comfort that really kind of layman's can use to interact with really specialized advanced technology is new. There's always been, advanced math, but if you didn't know how to do, algebra, you can't do calculus, you can't then move on to the next step. And now you're able to just skip a lot of those, which I think is interesting for people that are, new to product. They understand their own role really, really intimately. And they would always wouldn't it be great if I had a tool that could do X? And then you have, your product engineering team on the other side who has no idea that X would be really valuable. And that's always been a business challenge, is to figure out how to do all that. And then is X really worth doing in front of A, B, and C? And so now being able to build the skill set within an organization where really everybody feels like they're able to tinker and try and experiment and say, maybe I can do 80% of X on my own. And if it works, we'll build it out and kind of flesh it out fully. And I think that's where we are for a lot of the space right now. If you look 6 months ago, I don't think everybody in your team could just randomly start building apps. I do think there was a reasonable amount of skill you had to go through to be even an efficient vibe coder, kind of so to speak. I think those barriers are dropping incredibly fast.
Yeah. And going back to what you said previously, I think kind of what I would summarize it as is that one of the things you have to do to remain relevant is to be able to fail fast, right? Take those big bets, but when you fail, move on and pivot really quickly. Do you feel like operators potentially are overcorrecting right now to where they're going from, okay, I can build whatever I want as like a marketer versus as a trained engineer, or in other areas potentially?
Good question. I think that the over enthusiasm is less at the sharp end of the stick, and the people that are actually doing their day-to-day work and saying, "Oh, I can build a tool to replicate this or make it X easier." I think the hype is a little bit more on the hand of the stick, so to speak, where the investors, the CEOs, the way that we're talking about it, we've been a bit ahead of our skis for a while collectively when we're talking about this sort of industry. That doesn't mean you fall and crash. You can always kind of catch up to your skis, and that might be where we're sort of coming in. So I don't think that I'm sort of seeing that. I would say more where, collectively talking about, you've seen some of the examples where a services company will lay off their support staff and replace them with a chatbot. It's like, well, that was maybe a bit early. But that doesn't mean that in 6 months, that's not a slightly more reasonable way to do it. Or that maybe the answer isn't to lay off 100 person call center, but to cut it down to 5 with some support staff. So I feel like there are a lot of companies that are trying, and that failure was certainly instructive to everybody else in the industry. So there's still some kind of net positive to come out of it. But I think that that's really kind of the place where we are. You want to be able to, like you said, you want to be able to fail fast, learn from it, have measurable goals and outcomes so that you're not getting yourself in that situation where, perhaps you pilot something like that. And after, a certain period of time, you can make some better, more informed judgments. But it's at the same time, it is catching up constantly. I think one of the realizations that we've had to almost take the opposite point for people that maybe feel like they haven't done enough in AI is, I think that's an anxiety that a lot of business leaders have been feeling really since ChatGPT came out. It's, my goodness, this tool is so powerful. It seems like it can do a lot. I've seen other people do really impressive things with it. I know I should be doing more. I know I should be doing more with it. How can each of my teams help it? You get everybody to try to experiment. And it's, a lot of stuff is kind of okay. It's like, yeah, this marketing copy wasn't good. This images aren't quite good enough. Sure, I built like a prototype, but then we need to recode it entirely to make it work with the platform. And so there's been a lot of companies that have sort of started, invested a lot, and then kind of given up. And I would just caution, I guess, the piece of advice to continue to recycle those efforts and try again. I would really say over the last 3 to 6 months, the level of sophistication, but it seems to really, really be accelerating to the point where there are new people on our team that previously weren't necessarily making little prototypes to say, hey, look at the thing I made.
Something I want to kind of just like hone in on a little bit more. On one of my previous podcasts, I had a guest named Kim Seiler. She's co-founder, CPO of Athova, and she left a question for you to answer. And one thing that we talked a little bit about was, and I think it ties into what you mentioned, was like, if you don't have a plan or a metric for success for your AI rollout within your company, then you're going to fail every single time, right? And so I'm going to ask you this question from her in just a second. But before we get there, I want to ask you to give maybe an example of what kind of metrics do you feel like leaders should be putting in place to say, like, am I hitting this goal? Or, otherwise they might just be entering into like 10 different POCs and they're never really moving the needle forward.
I think that you nailed it. Like, that happens a lot. We have a lot of these proof of concepts. So I would say you want to track actual usage. Treat it like it's a real software product. Treat it like it's a real product on your roadmap that you're actually developing. And I think that most companies that build some type of software or have technology-enabled services or have stuff they build, you should already have some kind of metrics that you're looking at about how often is this getting used? What are the resources we're spending to maintain this code base? How often? What are our QA requirements every time we do something new? And incorporate this like it's a real piece. I think you have to say, get your stakeholders together, determine what the nature of the product is, figure out some kind of test pilot time. If you're, building a new email marketing tool, it's like, all right, what is our test scenario going to look like? Here are our existing metrics. It's this ROI with this much time. All right, it has to be this over this amount. So I think the biggest risk is just leaving things open-ended. And then on the other side of that, when you're talking about metrics, I think one of the important things is also adding metrics to the usage. There are like really significant psychological barriers, I think, that it takes for people to get over using a lot of these tools and using them effectively. If you've never coded anything, sure, you hear everybody talking about all this stuff. Until you actually do it, it might still seem like it's hard. There's a lot of friction there. And starting to get comfortable, like asking the models, hey, Claude, how do I do this? Hey, that thing you said doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know how to recompile whatever,
Yeah.
And so tracking that usage really builds competency, say, a number of prompts, a number of hours per week. And then I think you really start to see those prototypes, those projects show a lot more ROI more quickly.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to ask all of my AI tools is like, explain that to me like I'm 5, please. Like, break it down. And I think that, that really goes to show how far we've come, but how much further we have to go here. We're just really like scratching the surface. So what Kim asked, and this is the question I'm going to pass on to you now, is what do you feel like leaders are actually protecting that keeps them moving slow on AI?
Good question. I really like that question. So I'll say there's probably a prescriptive answer and then a realistic answer. I would say prescriptively, the thing you should be protecting is your data. One of the big concerns about all of these models is there's been tax information. You've seen horrifying examples of very sensitive personal, like medical and legal information that gets just thrown into Gemini or into ChatGPT. If you have something that makes your business special, you should protect it. And your first party data is that thing that makes you special. So dumping all that off into the world without having some way of making sure you know where it's going and what you're doing with it, or if you're able to have it encrypted or something, I think you do want to be protecting that. So you should be cautious about doing that. I think a lot more realistically, it's momentum. I think it's momentum that we do things a certain way. If you're running a team, you have to have a incentivized reason to change what you're doing now. And so I think, smart leaders have tried to set up, incentive programs. And, if you're sharing in the success of using the tools, then you're much more likely to sort of deploy them. And there's, you hear about different bounty programs on the best hackathon outcome and stuff. So I think a big reason why people are slow to adopt it is momentum about the way they've always done things, concerns about cost and the boogeymen of it's not really going to work, we're not really going to be able to make anything kind of do it. And then I think a lot of it is that psychological barrier too of, especially if you put your mind, yourself, it's one thing to think about a Fortune 500 CEO. Most businesses are small and medium businesses. And so if you put yourself in the mind of a, 35 person consulting firm or a 50-person construction firm, things like that, like those tools are immensely helpful, but it's also a bit outside of your traditional wheelhouse too. And you might not have somebody inside your company with that sort of expertise. So I think, it's really easy for us in tech to get very, very focused on how tech people make decisions and how we approach our businesses. But I also think there's a whole world out there that do have, if you're in the medical legal world, there are very real legal implications to be concerned about, and you want to go slow. And then certainly some industries are much more prone to move fast and break things. But I would say that the good reason is to protect your data. The more realistic reason is kind of existing momentum and kind of the difficulty of getting over some of those psychological barriers.
I almost feel like what I hear you saying is people are protecting comfort. Like we choose what's comfortable over what promotes growth, I think quite often, which is why, people struggle to stay in shape or lose weight or, grow companies. Like it's all the same. Nobody likes discomfort. And so I think the people who are become comfortable being uncomfortable, like those are the winners, I feel like. Your company is literally called AdDaptive, but it's kind of interesting because I think adaptive sort of implies reacting, where I feel like companies are really, and what you have done has been, moving from reacting to actually anticipating what's coming. So can you give an example potentially of one move that you made early that maybe didn't make sense at the time, one of those risks you were talking about that really did pay off?
Yeah, I would say early on, like you said, we bootstrapped the company. It was at first just Kevin and I in our basements, and then there were 3 or 4 of us in a tiny little office out in Waltham, Massachusetts. And one of the first risks we took was investing in automation. At the time, we were a remarketing pro platform with a data management platform for publishers. We were running thousands of ad campaigns manually. And so we started building our early APIs. We built our early automation and routine tools. And our mantra back in 2010 was, if you need to do something more than once, teach a robot to do it for you. And at the time, investing in an internal tool, if you were a VC company, that would not be tools that you would invest in. You would invest in your customer-facing products, and you would just hire more people and put them all in a room somewhere in a sweatshop to just run through the rote stuff of doing campaigns. But in retrospect, that's allowed us to scale our company really flexibly. It's allowed us to really build competence and confidence in the language of AI and the language of these tools and automation and algorithms. And so, it was a really short jump for us to go from automation to machine learning. And it was a short jump for us to go from machine learning to start integrating a lot of these new tools into our stack. And so we didn't come at, the ChatGPT era with no idea of kind of what all this stuff meant. We understood which pieces might work, which pieces definitely are things we're going to do right away, and which pieces are actually going to be a much higher hanging fruit that the tech kind of wasn't ready for. So I would say some of those early decisions and investing in what I would say is investing in resilience for our business. And that's just not really a thing that, again, we're bootstrapped, we're different. Those the variables in that equation are different for us. But the resilience of our company has definitely allowed us to face these different waves much more strongly. And investing in that early on was certainly a choice.
That's great. I'm going to push on that just a little bit further because, at your stage, every decision has different trade-offs, right? Like maybe it's speed versus quality or people versus performance, like short-term revenue, long-term bets, like you just talked about. Do you have sort of like a filtering mechanism that you use to personally make those calls when there's not really a clean answer?
I would say I'd get to talk about poker twice today. I'd fall back on sort of my old, it you have to analyze your hands with an understanding of the short-term impacts. And, stay with the analogy, that'd be like your bankroll. You might go all in with aces, but because that's the right hand, but you probably shouldn't do it with your house if you don't have a second one. And that's kind of the way to look at this. You have to understand this is a good bet. It might not pay off this time, but it's a good bet in the long term. And if we make 100 of these bets, 95 of them are going to work. And that means we can't get too agitated over the 5 that don't. But then at the same time, you can't bet the farm on any one particular outcome, because if you're wrong, you've got 5% events happen every single day, multiple times a day. And so I think that's really the lens that I kind of make a lot of my decisions for. And poker definitely really influenced kind of my risk analysis on those sorts of things. But it's long-term benefit and short-term risk. And are those existential? Are they things you can come back from? And what's the real benefit? And I guess the real challenge that is calibrating calibrating that analysis.
Yeah.
For that, you need that's experience. That's people on our team. We're really lucky that a lot of people that we've been working with, we've been together for 10, 12 years. A significant portion, all of our leadership team's been there over 10 years now. So that's another rare thing you don't find in a lot of businesses in this space, where we know each other very well. We're able to really trust each other's experience and bounce ideas off of each other, and also take risks, knowing that we have, a kind of good group around us to keep everything in control.
Yeah, this industry is certainly like serial daters, like people just swipe on on careers and companies really quick. So I think when you have a loyal team that stays together, it definitely just that team and time and tenure you have together, I think it speaks a lot for why you've been able to stay relevant for the amount of time that you've been in this industry. So the podcast is obviously called Agents of Change. And I like to ask everybody, what does it mean to be an agent of change to you personally or professionally right now? And how are you operating in that day to day?
So I'd be kind of the quote that sort of comes to my head is like, if you want to see a better world, start with your own little corner of it. And I would say that same thing kind of applies to being an agent of change. You want to make the world a better, more AI-driven place where customers get better value, brands have better conversations with their clients and with their accounts, and there's value kind of created along every portion of that. Start doing that in your own kind of area. And that's really what we see is we know that we want to take these tools to improve how we work with our brands, to offer them more value, give them better insight into who their customers are, what they're doing, what they're researching, when they're going to buy, and then how to actually reach them, have a conversation with them, and kind of keep that cycle going. So I think that's to be an agent of change everywhere, you really have to start local. Think global, act local in that sort of mindset, and be a agent of change for your own customers, for your own internal team, for your own business, your own partners, and I think that the rest will start to reverberate from there.
That's great. Thank you. You get to pass it forward now. So Patrick, what's a question that you want to leave for the next guest?
So one of the things that I'm always struck by, again, being in tech, like you mentioned, it's really easy to have our blinders on and think about the way that our types of businesses make decisions. I was struck this past weekend. I was at a basketball tournament for one of my daughters, and the facility was gigantic. There's 8 basketball courts, 8 indoor turf fields. There's go-karts outside and bumper cars and mini golf, and the place was packed. And you like these sort of sports entertainment factories exist, and they're out there. And so I'm just thinking, and it's AAU, so you actually have to pay to watch your own kid play basketball. And I'm counting the parents around, and I'm struck by that business that is so non-tangential to the portions of the business that I run. Obviously, there's marketing and there's ways they're attracting, customers and things like that. When it's great to, or I guess especially as we still are all thinking about the post-COVID world, like real life businesses that are thriving like that are not touch to the tech world. 2 questions related to those sort of brick and mortar, real experience. One, what can we learn from the way that they're thriving that has nothing to do with AI? And then separately, if you are one of those, millions of small businesses that are out there, what's like one easy step that you can do that isn't like ask ChatGPT to do marketing or something like that, but that they can learn about the way they run their business from the way that we're focusing on it? Again, like our our mindset and product cycles as it comes to these LLMs, they're happening in week-long like bursts and periods. And that's not the way that most of the rest of the world kind of does business. And I think there's just interesting things to learn from each other. So I guess that would be the long-winded way of that question. What can we learn from those kind of traditional brick and mortar businesses that don't seem to touch the digital world in at least as direct way as we do, and vice versa?
Yeah, I think that's a really fun question. I'm excited to ask that. You know, I also have daughters in AAU basketball, so my wallet feels along with yours. You know, you're spending like $200 every weekend to go see your kids play. It's crazy. But I feel like what it means to us, and that I'm excited to hear how somebody else will answer that question. But I'm thinking we all still crave human connection, right? Like we still want experiences, we still want to do things that are active and physical, and we are not happy living in a virtual world all the time. Patrick, I really appreciate you taking the time. What stands out in this conversation for me is just like staying relevant in the industry is not chasing every wave, but it's really about knowing what actually matters, putting on your not your poker face, but your poker hat, right? And thinking about like, how do I place solid bets and which risks am I willing to take, and which ones at which time, right? And then having the conviction to act on it early, even when maybe it's a little bit uncomfortable. So I think that's really what being an agent of change looks like in practice. So thank you again for joining so much.
Fantastic, Aubriana. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat with you. Looking forward to I enjoyed all the other previous episodes. Looking forward to seeing you chat with some more guests in the future as well.
Awesome. Well, if you enjoyed this conversation, you can find more episodes of Agents of Change Human in the Loop on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And we're talking to people like Patrick who are building, operating, and challenging what is next in this chapter of AI and what media actually looks like beyond the headlines. So we'll see you next time.